Okay, we've got to talk about the Nazca mummies. That's right. It's time for another Nazca mummy update. So get in here. This is Jack with Cosmic Road. I talk about UFOs and the paranormal. Please hit like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments below. Okay, I finally got around to reading this book, Mysterious Mummies of Nazca, by Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, a Russian scientist that was part of a team that went to study them along with various other teams. And it's a really great book, really well written by an actual scientist that studied them and validated the authenticity of these beings. So let's go over some of my takeaways from that book, and then we'll go on to some other stuff about the Nazca mummies. Some really cool stuff. I'm not going to go on a long rant about the book. I encourage everybody to check it out. A lot of it is very dry and scientific and technical, and he does go into a lot of history and how various scientific analyses are conducted, and history of carbon dating and the legitimacy of that, and the problems with that, and also with DNA analysis. So I'm not going to go over all of that. Honestly, I skimmed a lot of that. But the meat of it are that they did genetic testing on the mummies, on Maria, and also on the little guys. And so Maria is interesting, the large one, because she, from their DNA, they were finding that she had 30% of her genetics in common with humans. And their theory was that she might be an ancient hominid, in the human family, like Neanderthals or Denisovans, some extinct race of human that had existed at one point. Of course, the obvious flaw in that theory is that she has 3 fingers and 3 toes. So if she was at one point a hominid, or her ancestors were hominids, she's not, very human looking or primate looking in that respect, in her body design. So, I would suspect that, if she is a primate of some sort, then, obviously she has been tweaked, and her bloodlines have been worked on and adjusted, genetic engineering on some sort of primate possibly. And she has a very large cranial capacity, like 20% larger than human. She's about the size of a human. So really interesting findings about Maria, and also the other human-sized mummy that they studied. And they took genetic samples from her fingers and her toes to authenticate that they were, from the same being. Not cobbled together, a doll or what have you. Although they were saying that there's basically no way for these to be fakes. They are far too complex for them to be fakes. And, they're all the CAT scans and x-rays and everything all, confirm the legitimacy of these beings as real beings that were alive at some point. Now, it gets really interesting when you go to the little guys. The little guys don't have anything in common with us genetically. According to these tests they were getting, they are basically completely unknown. Nothing in their DNA matched anything that was known to the scientists that studied them. It wasn't just one team that studied them, the Russian team. There's also a Canadian team and at least one other lab that all studied them, finding the same results. So, so who are these guys? Are these actual aliens from another planet? Are they hybrids that were engineered by beings to live on this Earth? We don't really know. And those were the main takeaways I got from the book about the beings and their DNA. Another interesting thing was talking about the Nazca culture, which was not a large culture. I think you said like the max population was about 25,000 or something like that. They did some dark stuff, unfortunately. I didn't know much about the Nazca culture. but they did engage in, human sacrifice. And some of that stuff was pretty dark, and the things they did were pretty unfortunate and unpleasant. And they did have depictions of gods in their tapestries. What I find interesting is that those in their tapestries and rock work, maybe tapestries isn't the wrong word, textiles. What I find really interesting is that their depictions of the gods are not the depictions they made of the beings, of the Nazca mummies or the aliens or whatever they are. They had lots of depictions of the beings, interestingly, and I've shown a lot of those before, including one where it appears to be laying an egg. And, those could be eggs right there. I don't know. It's really, is that giving birth to something? What is that? I don't know, but it's fascinating. And so they did have a lot of these depictions of the beings in their art. So clearly they were known to the people of the time and may have even been interacting with them. But those are not the depictions of the gods. Depictions of the gods are often more sinister and more fantastic. More sinister. They're holding severed heads and, sometimes they're eating people and doing things. So it's interesting. I actually find that comforting in a way that, if they had been worshiping the beings, the Nazca mummy beings as gods, and they had been committing human sacrifice in their honor, that would raise troubling questions about the beings and their motivations and, their natures. Are they evil, right? But I'm comforted that the gods of the Nazca beings are not depicted as the Nazca mummies, who are very distinct in their artwork and very clearly representations of those beings. The gods were more mythical, fantastic creatures holding severed human heads and so on. So it is, that is interesting, right? They've got actual aliens there, but they don't seem to be worshiping them as gods. But they have their own gods. I think that is interesting. Now, these gods or beings that are holding severed human heads and victims could be a representation of their head-hunting culture, because the Nazca people did engage in a head-hunting culture, and there were found severed human heads amongst the ruins of the Nazca culture. So, interesting, dark and troubling, disturbing, but, there's a lot of dark human practices all over the world back in ancient times. And the peoples of that region, South America, Mexico, unfortunately did participate in some, pretty gruesome practices, human sacrifice and other unpleasant things. So it is good, however, to differentiate those practices from the beings who I hope are not responsible in any way for that, because obviously that would raise very troubling implications. But I am encouraged that the gods don't seem to resemble the beings at all. In other news, here's an article from CNN about the mummies. What? Of course, it's CNN Brazil, but it's still CNN. And it's actually a favorable article. It's not mocking or belittling. It's actually just taking us through it. It's crazy. I love it. Mummies of what would be non-human life found in Peru in 2015, for example, were displayed in Mexico's Chamber of Deputies in October. Researchers studied the mummies and stated that they were not, in fact, human life. In line with this, NASA announced that it will strengthen its UFO research center. Mexico case. The mummified remains, believed to be those of ET beings, were displayed in the Mexican Chamber of Deputies on September 12th during a debate at a public assembly for the regulation of UAP, promoted by Deputy Sergio Gutierrez Luna, according to information from CNN Espanol. The remains of two creatures measuring about 2 feet long were displayed to deputies. The bodies were found in Peru in the Nazca Lines region. And it goes on talking about the case and the situation in NASA's response to it. A few days after the Mexican case, NASA presented also in September a report commissioned to raise possibilities on how the agency can contribute scientifically to the analysis of UFOs, now called UAP. Yeah, I don't expect anything to come from NASA, but you never know. You never know. But there you go. CNN Brazil having a favorable and objective look at the Nazca mummies. In other news, did they have retractable heads? Well, maybe, maybe not. We don't really know. But this is an animation of what that might have looked like if indeed their heads had been retractable. Crazy, crazy, but possible. In other news, how could the beings eat or drink? They don't seem to have jaws really. Their mouths couldn't have moved. They had tiny little mouths. And look at this, the food conduit is just tiny for anything to get down their throat. But, you know, if indeed that is how they absorbed nutrition through their mouths and not absorbing it through their skin as greys might, and they have a lot in common with the greys, from their size and their shape and how they didn't, their limbs didn't articulate very well. Well, but let's just go under the assumption that they ate with their mouths. How did that work? Was it smoothies? Oral opening. It is an opening of 15 millimeters in length, without lips, without teeth, nor muscles for chewing. The beings feed by aspiration of liquids. Food orifice. Behind the mouth opening in the lower part, a similar structure to a hard palate with a very small orifice where the food is swallowed. And yeah, it does. It has a tiny little mouth, tiny little food conduit. I'm trying to blow this up for you so you can see this in better detail, but I don't know how to blow that up. So anyway, just kind of squint. But yeah, so there is a possibility that they drank in liquid form. But again, greys seem to absorb nutrition through their skin, so it's not outside of the bounds of possibility that the Nazca beings may have done so as well. We just don't know at this time. Now, about how they articulated and, if they are similar to the greys, it might be helpful to talk about that for a moment. This is from the Wand. The small gray's body appears frail with thin limbs and no musculature or bone structure. There are no knees or elbows as such, and legs are the same diameter from the top of the thigh to the bottom of the calf. Nor are there clearly defined ankles or wrists, and that is from CBD Bryan's Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind. However, there is some additional information over here that it might be worth going over by Fernando Jimenez, who says they do have joints, particularly in their hands. There may not be obvious elbows when they can bend their arms. The same goes for their legs. They are able to bend them, but may not be as flexible as humans. The rigidness which you are pointing out is consistent with many other accounts. It's strange how they move. The Andreasen case comes to mind. Little grays may appear rigid when displacing, penetrating solid surfaces, or seemingly being caught in a time loop, almost like something rapid and unstable trying to slow down. Also, it's important to note there are several variants. But yeah, there you go. There's the little guys right there, and they seem to be able to go through solid objects. They can go through walls. Does it have anything to do with how they articulated? I don't know. But it's interesting. I don't know if they're related to the Nazca mummies or not, but they do seem to have a lot in common with them. So it's interesting to consider in the Nazca mummies that we may be looking at some species or variant of gray, or some gray type race, because of course there are multiple gray type races that are not technically what we normally think of as gray. Like in the Roswell crash, for example, those weren't what we normally think of as gray beings, but they were definitely very similar to the gray beings. Possibly some variant or cousin out there, or maybe it's just a convenient body shape for beings to assume. I don't know, but let me know what you think about this Nazca news update in the comments below. And if you would, give me a big thumbs up. I sure would appreciate it. Smash the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of future videos. Please join me on social media, Facebook, Twitter, social media, Discord links are below. If you wanted to support Cosmic Road in an even bigger way, and I know you do, please consider buying a t-shirt in the merch store below or by becoming a channel member. Channel members are rock stars, and they often get to see videos hours ahead of everybody else. Meanwhile, there are plenty of other videos to check out on the channel, and I'll see you guys next time. This is Jack with Cosmic Road, signing out.